A quick word of warning. Today's conversation contains mention of suicide. Please take a moment to consider whether you would like to continue listening to our chat. Welcome to the NABS podcast. NABS is the support organisation for those working in advertising, marketing and media. I'm your host, Louise Scody. Each week I'll be chatting with someone from our industry to find out how they support themselves and those around them through challenging times as well as the day-to-day. And it's all to help you support your own mental wellness. I can't wait to start chatting. Scott Sallée is Social Impact and Sustainability Lead at Dentsu and is one of the leading voices in LGBTQ advocacy in the UK. Scott's been recognised as a top 10 diversity hero at the British LGBT Awards, as a game-changing talent featured in Attitude magazine, and highly commended on the IPA list for inspirational inclusivity leadership. Scott is a board member of the IPA's Talent Council and an ambassador for NABS. A neurodivergent advocate for neurodiversity, Scott is passionate about intersectionality, psychological safety, and sustainability. Scott also hails from Hawaii, which is one of my favourite facts about them. Aloha, Scott. Did I say that right? Aloha?
Aloha is correct. Yes. Yeah.
I'm so pleased. How are you doing this week?
Big question to start.
Yeah.
Summer is beautiful. Summer is kind of where I come into my best self in many ways. I think I'm powered by the sunshine. So that's giving me a lot of energy. Yes.
That's very Hawaiian of you.
I know.
Now, what does mental wellness look like to you? Does it look like it's summer, I'm coming into my own, this is it? Can you also achieve mental wellness in winter as well?
We have to. We cannot be reliant or dependent on external things, whether that's weather or times of the year. But yeah, mental wellness looks like to me a thoroughly stocked toolkit of healthy coping mechanisms. Things like breath work, which has been transformational in my life. Things like mindful movement, physical activity, but indeed like wholesome people, trusted allies, community, boundaries, and things like quietude. So amidst all the busyness, all the responsibilities, is coming back and carving out the time to get quiet enough with oneself to really understand, how am I feeling, outside of all the things that can maybe convince us that we feel otherwise or numb ourselves so we don't need to feel it. So yeah, mental wellness, that's at least my perspective in this current chapter, but I am open to evolving that and continuing to learn more too.
Very much sounds like an active practice for you, where there are things that you do and you have to build in and make sure you are actively doing in order to support yourself.
Correct. And actually there's part of me that doesn't always want to see healing as a constant practice. I think it's something that I would like to get to a point of maybe a little bit, not so much maintenance. But I think, having faced some challenges and the resulting impacts of those, it's a delayed beautiful point where that's what helps me be my best now, or some days that's what helps me just show up, not as my best, but just show up. And so I think there's also an element of honesty, of having more conscious conversations with people, whether that's stakeholders at work, whether that's family, whether it's friends, and be like, this is what's moving through me right now. This is what I have to offer. And honest with myself as well. And, even things like saying no to some things that maybe, I did want to go to or do or participate in. But having to be honest with, there will, with the right people, there's always going to be another opportunity. But right now, it might just not be the right moment for me, or to go and expend that energy.
Firstly, you describe breathwork as transformational.
Yes.
Now, for anyone listening to this who thinks this sounds like a really big task that could take over your day, my impression is that even 4 or 5 minutes during the day of deep breathing is going to help you. Can you talk to me about your approach and confirm whether it's possible to enjoy a quickie?
I'm borrowing that statement. That's great. You can absolutely quickie it, in the sense that I think it's something that you can do with regularity. It doesn't have to be long extended periods. And I think this is what people are looking to, is can that weave its way? Can you sort of habit stack it? So I tell people, like, right, if you're making a cup of coffee, if you're making a mug of tea, rather than scrolling on your phone, can you do a little bit of a breathing activity right then? And that can be as simple as like slowing down your breath. So whenever I'm like facilitating practices for other people, I say, like, think low, slow, and deep. So the breath is coming low into the lower abdomen. You're slowing it down in, you're slowing it down out, and it's deep. So this like big expansion and contraction of the body. And even that, like, sometimes before I go and do a presentation, I did it just before this podcast because I was like, it's a little bit of a reset button, um, throughout the day. And I think it's a way of taking our power back because there's so many things that pull on our nervous system, whether that's trauma in the past, whether that's, a challenging person that you're dealing with in the present, whether that's, your own intrusive thoughts, whether that, anything, anything that goes wrong. It's a way of taking your power back and saying, I'm going to decide how my nervous system is operating. And the breath is our most efficient way of actually coming back to our bodies, coming back to ourselves. And yeah, like I said, I've tried yoga, I've tried mindfulness. They're all wonderful. But for me, breath work, and for many of the people I speak with, that's been really the breakthrough. So that's why, yeah, I've become quite an advocate for it.
This is a really great example of something that is quick, that is free, that you have at your disposal, and that doesn't need to be as complicated as it sounds. I love the idea of doing some deep breathing while you're
Mm,
making a cup of tea
mm,
and habit stacking it. That's
yeah. Habit
something that I'm
stacking.
going to try after this.
There's a term called email apnea where some people get a stressful email and they and they hold their breath, and just the amount of tension that you start to store in your body. And like, actually, this is something that I realized when starting to peel the layers back and heal from some complex trauma, was I didn't realize how tense I was all the time. And I think even if you breathe, you're inviting more fluidity, you're inviting more expansion into your body, and as a result, you start to everything else starts to settle as well, or maybe emotions rise to the surface that you can welcome in a new way. Anyway, this could be a breathwork only podcast if you
Yeah,
show.
I'm feeling that we're going to end up with a breathwork offshoot podcast of this, which I'm going to be very
Yeah,
happy about. So
let's
yeah,
let's do a little
let's try
recording
that.
for the round.
Um, there's also something around boundaries, which is
Mm,
possibly my favorite subject and something we come back to again and again on the podcast. And the next thing I want to ask you is doing all of the activism work that you do, and your work has a big emotional and mental load and responsibility with it.
yeah.
And in your own words, you have a beautifully neurodivergent brain
Mhm.
and you're a member of the LGBTQ plus community. So you have all of these different hats and responsibilities and identities. How do you look after yourself while you're engaging in all of this work? And are boundaries a really key part of that?
Mm. Yeah, I mean, I think one of the reasons I wanted to come and speak to you about this is, like, Nabs and I have the same approach to caring for people, as in we give without the expectation of receiving, and that can be a very challenging place if you're not equally being supported by others. I think that's why I've always been an advocate of NABS and ensuring that we're also supporting, which means, funding its vital services. But like, NABS has always been there for all of us. And for me, when I was struggling with anxiety, when I was struggling with depression, when I was struggling with suicide, loss of direction, and when COVID started and was really impacting my community, my friends, my industry, I wanted to use all. I saw the need was so great. It was, it was such a peak point that I poured. I, they talk about pouring from the cup. I was just I was just pouring it everywhere, and it was a really risky place to be in. And so um, I really started to be more conscious about coming back to, like, not everything has to scale. I can't support everyone. Now I realize that, like, if you've helped one person, you've done enough. You've done incredible work. I really believe that if we all adopt a mindset of caring about one person every day, and sometimes that person is you,
Yeah.
that will create the collective healing that we need. But Yeah, when you're talking about energy uses, I think also like being in community makes activism and advocacy feel less alone and less tiring because it reminds you that you're not alone in this. And there are other good people doing incredible work as well that you can continue to learn from. So yeah, it's essential. And I think even on the most challenging days, I would choose it 1,000 times over because
Because you're
that's
getting so much from it as well.
correct. So it is selfless and maybe a bit selfish because it gives me so much joy as well.
That theme of power of community is another theme that comes through really strongly in the conversations that we have, both on this podcast and also with
Mm,
friends, allies,
mm,
people that come to use
mm,
NABS services. And it's something that we're really drilling down on now at
mm,
NABS because we know from so much research that being part of a community really helps to support your mental wellness while connecting you to other people and allowing other great work to take place. Let's get back to those boundaries.
mm.
So you mentioned before sometimes you have to say people no, it's not going to happen today. You have to say no to things. And I imagine that could be quite tough when you are getting so much from the causes that you're joining in with, or you care so much about the people that you're helping.
Yeah.
So, how do you go about communicating those boundaries in a way that still supports how you're feeling and also can maintain the relationship you've got with whoever it is that you're communicating that boundary to?
And I've had a bit of a restructure in my ways of working conversations. And that's with I even my friends think I'm weird, but sometimes I'll even have like a ways of working for friendship because sometimes you just tend to blunder into friendships. You meet someone who's cool, and then you just crack on, and you let it evolve as it does. But being really upfront about your um, your energy and how you actually need to be treated, how you like to be spoken to, how you like to give and receive any sort of communication or feedback, like all of that is so valuable. But again, that takes the work of actually knowing yourself well enough to be able to articulate it and communicate to other people. So you can't just jump in and say, oh yeah, I like text over phone. Like that's not the level I'm talking about. Like, okay, so like Louise, when you say this, like I would really appreciate if, and even just going into that level um of exchange with your friends. But in a work sense, I've now made well-being as one of the agenda points of the ways of working conversation. So um I found that dramatically changes the way that we engage with one another because it's not a nice to have. That is how we show up for each other, as we both deserve to. And I try and promote that. I sow the seeds, so to speak, of that across the organization.
So, what does that actually look like? Is that, say, I want you to take part in a project.
Hmm,
So I email you with the task and
yeah.
I email you with the deadline. Is that then you saying, well, I can do that, but then my well-being might suffer if I have to hit that deadline. So how about I do it for you, but here's another deadline? Is that the kind of thing?
That's more of like a short-term thing. Usually I would structure these conversations not with every single person I interact with, but if I know that we're going to go on a bit of a journey together over a project life cycle, it's like that should be part of the initial setup and scoping, so that we both have an expectation and a respect, and also it's part of the getting to know each other phase beyond the okay, well, I'm so and so. These are my pronouns. If people do share that, and things like I don't know, you have a cat, dog, like great, that's all interesting. But talk to me about you. Talk to me about like why you show up for work, what matters to you. That can seem a little bit confusing initially, but I think if I have enough influence to influence the room, that's the kind of conversations I want to have. Is like, what's the why behind this? How is this leading us collectively towards, our goals, our ikigai, our purpose, um, and how can we collectively support one another to feel good through that process, and then creating things like feedback opportunities to move through, and not feedback as in like you did great or clapping emoji on teams, but really like that positive reinforcement that allows us to come back with constructive criticism or things that are more developmental without it being perceived negatively.
There's a lot of trust involved in that and a lot of relationship building.
Trust, psychological safety, relationship building, but those are the environments that I want to work in. So it doesn't always happen 100% of the time. But I always find that it's worth pushing. And it also gives me a bit of a diagnostic on the kinds of other leaders that I want to work with and for.
I want to just reflect on something that you said before
Mm,
when you openly shared that you've been through trauma
mm,
and that suicidal thoughts have been part of that
mm,
trauma and history. And I just wanted to acknowledge that because we skipped into other
mm.
conversational directions. I just wanted to acknowledge that the fact that you had shared that and to thank you for sharing that because that's a really brave thing to do.
Thank you. I think I've now become more and more accustomed to sharing my story. There's definitely a bit of a lurch of a, oh my gosh, like eh, even so, even with practice, but my my inner dialogue at that moment is I don't know how many people I may be able to help by sharing. And so it's the to do it, yeah, just or even do it for that self of me that was for too long not willing or not comfortable reaching out for help. Because it's true, when you're in those dark places, you just don't believe that it could get better. And so that's why I don't think some of the models we see of like it gets better or things like that. It's true, but it's so challenging to feel, see, imagine the truth in that. So anytime I can be there to provide support for someone or a kind word, and I think that there's a sense of we don't know, and this is not my own words, but it's something that I've internalized is we don't know what people are going through, which is why we need to consistently choose kindness. Um, because we could influence someone's day and their life in a very powerful way for the better or otherwise by an interaction that we have from them. We could be their ray of sunshine, or we could be something that makes their day even more difficult.
Even on the smallest levels, even the
Correct.
way that you say hello to someone,
Correct.
and maybe they're feeling particularly unseen that day, and you say hello to them with a smile on your face, so you could
Correct.
completely transform their morning. You just don't know, do you?
Yeah.
I'm really interested in something that you wrote in the
Mm.
course of my Scott research about non-binary people in Hawaii. So that's where you come from, and these people being honoured as caregivers and community
Mm.
leaders, which I thought was really lovely. So why do you think this is? And do you think that this legacy is why you've stepped into so much advocacy work?
Potentially. I mean, I think that queerness is seeing the world in a different way, and neurodivergence is experiencing the world in a different way. Through our senses, through our brains, and so like the more we create psychologically safe environments, where the allyship is robust and vulnerability is welcome, celebrated. Where we have integrity to speak with each other on an honest way, as opposed to my mask meeting your mask. And like those can all sound as nice to haves, but I think like in a competitive talent environment, our HR teams say that the most frequent questions from high performers after salary and benefits is around diversity, belonging, well-being, sustainability. So like if we are trying to make better businesses, attract and retain high performers, we got to get really serious about culture, inclusion, purpose, things like that. But it's true that like queer and neurodivergent people, there's also an overlap between those communities. I was reading a study cited by the University of Cambridge, and like I actually didn't know the amount, but um, approximately 8 times more likely.
Wow.
um,
Okay.
and then you can break that down into different, so whether that's autism or ADHD, whether the person identifies as asexual, or but all maybe we can link the research afterwards.
Yeah, that would
And
be
same thing
great.
around gender variance as well. So yeah, people with ADHD 6.64 times more likely to express gender variance, whether that's questioning gender identity or gender dysmorphia. I really think it's because, and actually this is not my own theory, but the predominant one is that neurodivergent people are less aware of or inclined to follow social societal norms. So they're like, okay,
That makes a lot of sense. Like, I might as well be
that,
myself because I
that
have no idea that that might be a problem for some other people.
Yeah, and maybe there's less desire to conform to society's expectations, but I think a lot of LGBTQ plus people do this advocacy work because they're passionate about their community. But I was reading a story of a colleague at Dentsu who's in Italy. And as you may know, the laws changed there that no longer identify or acknowledge or recognize, for example, homosexual parents. And so
Right.
he said he woke up and he was no longer a father of his child. And he says, I never planned on being an activist. I just wanted to be a dad. Oh, I mean, the
Yeah.
that yeah. So some and when we think of our trans colleagues and siblings and families and loved ones who are kind of fighting for their lives out there, they didn't necessarily want to be an activist. Um, they just want to live as themselves. They just want to live. You know, hate crime is up over 156% in the UK. 88% of trans youth are experiencing suicidal ideation. So it is a question of not just human rights, but just the right to
Yeah.
live healthily. So, but from my perspective, I always try and use whatever privilege I have to enter spaces to advocate for people who might not have been invited there, um, and then balance that with stepping out of the spotlight and passing the mic and being like, okay, how can I use the power of a plus one to get someone else in the space? Because um, yeah, it's bridging that, and I think maybe that's what queer and neurodivergent people are able to do in our more structured world as it's been to date, is be like, nah, you're nah, we're not gonna do that. But we see a different way. We see a better way. We see a way that's more fluid, that's more beautiful, more inclusive, and we're gonna get there.
While you're doing all of this support work, you also need support. So, what can everyone do to better support LGBTQ plus individuals in these roles as caregivers and activists?
Um, I think that it's important to work on allyship, an active allyship, meaning that it's a verb, not something that you post as a hashtag and be like, woohoo, done.
Yeah.
but things like, when is the last time, if you're not a part of these communities, and the same applies to any other underrepresented community. When's the last time that you made a content decision of looking at a book or a podcast or a series that centers their lived experiences. Someone that's maybe not in your friends group, someone that doesn't think or act or speak like you. That could be social class. That could be anything, race, ethnicity. The same approach applies. Um, and learn a bit more about not just the challenges that they're facing, but the joy. I think let's connect around our shared love. As well as the shared challenges. We have to be honest with things like systemic inequalities, and not deny those. But also, I think the best way to connect with someone that maybe feels like they're different to you is look for that commonality. We all want to be seen, recognized, heard, valued, loved. We all want a warm, nourishing meal, hugs. So I think it's looking at the things that connect us rather than focusing too much on, oh, I don't know, why is their hair a certain way? Why do they dress a certain way? Well, because that's what helps them feel like themselves. And doesn't every human deserve that in this limited, beautiful, brief experience we're all sharing together?
It's such a good point. But the struggles are so there, and there's so much work to do, and there's so many challenges. But on the flip side of that, there is that notion of what binds us and what connects us, and where can we find those good times together as well.
Mm,
We're thinking about advertising, marketing, and media as an industry. There's clearly a reason why you've chosen to work in it and you haven't chosen to work in, I don't know, engineering or finance. Like maybe you think advertising is going to be more fun. Maybe you're more up for a laugh. I mean, that could be any number of reasons, right? You're looking for a certain kind of working atmosphere. So that might be the first proof point that, well, actually, we all have at least something in common that we
mm.
can work on here.
Hopefully, it's our approach to creativity as a way of shaping possibilities that never existed before. So, like, what can creativity and innovation do to shape a world where we all thrive? And I think that, like, what I witness in Adland that really lifts me up is things like when we come together and we go beyond chasing an award or a headline, and we really collaborate. We gather with purpose. So, when Adland looks honestly at itself, for example, it examines like what is our collective responsibility, collective legacy. Are we happy with the working conditions? Are we happy with our approach to contentious clients amidst the climate emergency? So things like time two, which NABS has been a driving force, the driving force behind, or like the pitch positive pledge from the IPA, which looked at creating a better well-being experience for teams going through pitches, to things like environmental, add green, add net zero, groups like Purpose Disruptors or the Conscious Advertising Network. That lifts me up in terms of like, okay, we're looking seriously at ourselves. We're doing that inner work first. We're doing that first audit. And then we're coming together across what can be quite competitive lines of being like, what is bigger than all of us? And can we focus on that a bit? That gets me really, really, yeah, hopeful. Maybe would I say that we need to do more? Definitely. That's the catalyst in me. But there's a lot of good work going on.
You mentioned before about how you've used NAB services,
Yes.
and also you're a NABS ambassador, which we should explain. Our ambassadors are people who take the word of NABS out into their companies, tell people what NABS can offer in terms of our services, whether that's group coaching or calling our support team or coming to one of our events. I want to thank you for your work as a NABS ambassador and really acknowledge that. But also ask, if you don't mind talking about it, how NABS has helped you in the past.
Yes. So my probably one of the most challenging chapters of my life was when I was made redundant from a position I really, really enjoyed. And now looking back, I recognize that I had attached my identity and my worth to my job, as many of us do.
Yeah.
Someone says, okay, so hey, who are you? Well, you usually tell people what you do at work.
Right. It's the first
Um,
question when you meet someone
of
new.
course,
What do you do?
of course. And that's why, I find networking a bit cringe sometimes. I almost want to play a game like, all right, tell me, but you can't talk to me about your country or your job or anything like that. But I digress. And so it was NABS services, specifically things like the CBT that NABS provided at the time, but also the career coaching to be like, well, how can I build myself back up from this and recognize that, oh my gosh, I have value beyond a title. I have value beyond, a salary or a job responsibility. And that is something that is so critical, I think, for all of us to do that self-examination at some point in our career. I was forced into it, and I was already in kind of a challenging position mentally at the time, so it definitely didn't help. But I think if people haven't had that crisis, kind of nudge yourself into that self-reflection now, as in like, can you decouple the beauty, the glory, the multifaceted nature of who you are from that title? And I think that will also help us have a different approach to working, in a way that, yeah, when I'm at work or when someone else is at work, like, go for it. Use work to have that self manifestation, that self actualization, but recognize that you are more than that. And that was the lesson that now I've learned looking back. But during, it was it was the lowest that I remember feeling, and I'm grateful that I had services like NABS to get me through.
I'm so glad we were able to help you.
Mm.
And I think it's important to say that we've got a number of classes now, free classes that people can come onto, half a day, couple of hours, and on a number of different subjects that really will encourage you to reflect upon who you are, what you can do, what your interests are, and also to connect with other people across the industry as well. So that you can have that time and space that you're talking about where you can step outside of yourself and your regular day to day and build up your reserves and another way of thinking about yourself, which is a really valuable exercise. I only have one question left. I can't believe we've got to the end of it. What's a lesson that you've learned about how to support yourself?
So I'm going to quote Trisha Hersey from the NAP Ministry. Great, check her out if you haven't. That rest is radical resistance in a world that tries to define us by our productivity.
I am nodding along like a woman who really needs a rest.
Because that's it. If if we carve out and consciously make time for rest, and also another one, there's 7 types of rest. So check those 2 things out, please. The Nap Ministry, she's an incredible Black scholar from the United States, and then 7 types of rest. There's a great article and a bit of a TED talk, because there's emotional rest, there's physical rest, there's I won't share them all, but yeah, look into that, because that's how I think we can bring more of ourselves to the occasions where we choose to really show up. Because when I want to connect with you, I want the fullness of that, not just both of us just kind of stumbling
Yeah,
along and dialing it in.
yeah.
So maybe we do fewer things, but we do them with our full heart and our full mind and our full presence. I know we don't have enough time now, but another thing that I've been reflecting on is attention and intention, as in, like, how can I bring more intention to my attention? That's how we can really listen to people more completely, see people more fully.
Absolutely love everything about that. We'll put links to everything that Scott has mentioned in the show notes below so that you can find out about different types of rest and then indulge yourself in them. Is that how you
Mm.
get quietude then? Do you consciously think, okay, today I'm going to have emotional rest and go and carve that out for yourself? Or do you just have a rest
It's
and
a bit
see
of a
what comes
menu,
up?
so it's, yeah, bit of a menu.
I like the sound of that menu. It has been such a wonderfully calming, insightful chat, and I'm so glad that you are part of the NABS family and part of our industry. And it's always a pleasure to chat to you. So thank you so much for giving your time
I
today.
appreciate you. I appreciate Nabs. You know how much.
Oh, thank you. And we wish you lots of luck for the rest of your day. Hope you get in some emotional rest and at least one of the 7 naps.
Thank you.
Thanks, Scott.